Hello, everyone. Thank you for your interest and for joining this webinar organized by the European Rewilding Network of Rewilding Europe. European Rewilding Network, or ERN for short, is a community of 70 rewilding initiatives across Europe. And in a way, it is a platform for exchange of knowledge, ideas, best practices, and also for a platform for having constructive dialogues about practical rewilding. The purpose of Rewilding Intro, these mini webinars, is to give an opportunity to our members to share their story, their achievements, their challenges along their way, and to share this with other ERN members, but also with a wider audience. Rewilding Intros are the only events of the European Rewilding Network which are actually open to a wider public. Last time, maybe some of you have joined our last ERN intro. So last time we heard about the Life Links project from Slovenia and Croatia, and this time we are taking you to UK, more specifically to the northwestern edge of the Lake District National Park in Cumbria, which is home to Wild Ennerdale. I would like to wish a big welcome to our speakers, Gareth Browning, who is one of the founders of the Wild Ennerdale and the area forester for Forestry England, and Rachel Oakley, the partnership officer. Rachel dedicated 25 years of her life to Wild Ennerdale. My name is May. I am the host of the European Rewilding. I'm the coordinator of the European Rewilding Network, and today I am in the role of your host. Before we start, let me just give you a few remarks about our webinar environment. This is a Zoom webinar, so your audio and your video is disabled. But feel free to post your questions during the presentations. Once we get to the Q&A session, we will cover as much as we can. The questions that remain unanswered, I will communicate them to Gareth and Rachel, who will then come back to you. If you are having problems with sound, if you don't hear us well, instead of connecting via Eventbrite, try connecting via Zoom with a Zoom link. This might resolve your problem. In case you're having major technical difficulties, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our Rewilding Europe's YouTube account early next week. So in case you're having problems, you will be able to watch it then. Well, thank you for your patience, and I would like to give the word now to Rachel and Gareth. Hi, Rachel. Hi, Gareth.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Rachel. Hi, May.
Yeah,
hello,
Gareth,
everybody.
I'm gonna try to put your camera on. No, I think you need to do it on your own, just so our audience can see you.
Mine's not responding.
Yours not responding.
No.
Well, we'll try to.
You just have to put on my voice and not see my pretty face. I'm sorry.
We hear you very well. That's important. Well, hi again, and thanks for joining us. I heard that you have a little surprise for us.
Yes, we decided that we'd done many PowerPoints and watched many PowerPoints over this lockdown period and felt it would be a challenge for us to try and do a video instead. So Rachel and I and John, another colleague who can't be here, we're going to present this presentation as a video. So hopefully you get to see a bit more of the valley, and it's a video, so you get to see things moving. Although I know May and I are having trouble with it jumping at my end, but I'm a long way north, so maybe it'll be fine for everybody a bit nearer. So I hope you enjoy this video, and we'll be around at the end to answer questions.
So we are really taking you to a virtual journey to Wild Ennerdale, which is fantastic. Yeah. I'm going to put the link to the YouTube video that Rachel and Gareth prepared, just in case that you're having problems viewing it via Zoom. So you might want to watch it via YouTube and maybe come back here. But I'm going to start with the share now, and I hope everything is going to work.
Fingers crossed. Thanks,
Fingers crossed.
So a big welcome to Ennerdale in the quiet corner of the Lake District National Park. So I'm Rachel Oakley and I'm the Partnership Officer for Wild Ennerdale.
And I'm Gareth Browning. I'm the Area Forester with Forestry England and a partner in Wild Ennerdale for this valley.
So we've got a beautiful day here in the valley. And we're nestled on the quieter side of West Cumbria within the National Park. The lovely valley is the backdrop here, and we're not far also from coastal communities in West Cumbria. Beyond that is the Irish Sea with nice views out to the Isle of Man on a clear day, and also we're not far from the Scottish border up in Dumfries and Galloway. So we've got a lovely opportunity to share some of the experiences for the last kind of 2 decades of working on this project. And we'll showcase some of the sites around the valley. So just a little bit about Wild Ennerdale. So around 20 years ago now, 4 partners came together to discuss managing the whole valley in a different way. So it's very much about a landscape scale approach. And those discussions led to Wild Ennerdale developing. And our vision is to favour natural processes. And this very much steers our decision making and the practical delivery in the valley. So we've gone from very much a kind of fragmented, piecemeal approach to looking after this special place to a much more holistic landscape scale ambition, if you like. So those partners involved, we've got a combination of charity, so the National Trust, just shy of 6 million members. And we have United Utilities, so that's the water company for this region who look after the lake, so that's Ennerdale Water. Now it's a non-owned catchment, so it's important to have the water company involved. It gives them a much kind of greater steer on what happens within the catchment, and that's obviously important for water quality into the lake. We also have Forestry England, so they are the biggest landowner in the valley, and Forestry England came into being, if you like, in the valley in the early 1920s, post First World War, when there's a big increase in demand for timber as a nation. So that significantly changed the look and feel of the valley, and that's influenced kind of where we are today with Wild Ennerdale and our approach to thinking about woodland and forestry. And then the 4th partner is Natural England, so government organisation, and they have a key advisory and supporting role. Very much of this landscape is designated for special qualities, so it's really important to have their steer on thinking about future management for the valley. So it's landscape scale, just under 5,000 hectares in total, and so practical delivery and also the mindsets of the partnership are very much about thinking collaboratively, thinking as one team, and we can, see that in the way that the valley is evolving into the future. As a partnership over the last 2 decades, we've come together and shared resources to kind of broaden our understanding of people in the landscape and that ebb and flow of human activity. So not just focusing on kind of the last century or a couple of centuries, but the last 3+ millennia, when we know that cycles of people and settlement have come and gone in this valley, and that more of a broadened understanding of that relationship with the land. So we just stood up here in the Middle Valley at a place called Smithy Beck, and just behind me is what's known as a double-walled longhouse. There's a series of 4 in a line here. So a medieval settlement, and very much connected with a bloomery site down by the lake. And through working with archaeologists, we know we have over 500 individually listed archaeological features in the valley. So that in itself is something to celebrate. And we share the knowledge and understanding of that through our website and focusing on individual features. Also within those features we have scheduled ancient monuments, and obviously that comes under our care across the partnership area.
As a partnership, we're really focused on natural process and releasing them across the valley. This is a really good example where there used to be a concrete pipe bridge that was blocking the natural processes of this river, taking gravels downstream onto the Arctic char spawning beds, just down near the lake. In 2010, levels of fish spawning were down to just a handful of fish, and working with the Environment Agency, identified this bridge needed to come out to let more gravel downstream for them to lay their eggs in. So we replaced it with a footbridge, and within a couple of years, the char spawning increased. So now we have 500, 600 adults each year, and the Environment Agency have said they're no longer under threat of extinction, which is really good.
So this is the River Liza, and in Old Norse language means shining, and I think on a day like today, you can really see its natural beauty. It's a key feature of the valley, and it's absolutely beautiful. Its source starts at the valley head, up around Great Gable, and it flows through the upper and middle valley for around about 6 or 7 miles until it reaches Ennerdale water.
My name is John Gorst. I'm the Catchment Partnership Officer for United Utilities in Cumbria, and I represent the company on the Wild Ennerdale Partnership. The River Liza responds very differently to most other rivers in the county. When we have severe rainfall events, rather than becoming a raging torrent destroying things downstream, bridges and other things, it actually spreads out across the floodplain. And whilst there are millions of litres of water passing through the system, it all flows fairly slowly. And because it's running through dense vegetation in some areas, that slows it down even more. And by slowing down, it drops out a lot of its bed load, a lot of the sediments and silts that have been eroded higher up the channel. And that's really important for lots of reasons, not just for water quality, but also for biodiversity in general. It creates all sorts of niches for things, for vegetation to establish. It benefits the fish because the river is dynamic and has deeper pools and shallow riffle beds and all of the sort of features that the fish require for their life cycles. There's plenty of woody debris in the channel for them to hide from predators, and so it functions in a proper way. And I suppose as a partnership we've come to realise the importance of that functioning as part of the Wild Ennerdale story. Dynamic rivers give us a huge amount.
So behind us are our wonderful herd of Galloway Caves. So back in 2006, we took the decision as a team to introduce cattle to bring in a different type of dynamic disturbance to the valley, in addition to sheep grazing. So they bring a disturbance within kind of traditionally grazed fields, but also importantly within the forest now as well. So we're starting to blur those boundaries between farmland and forest, and that in itself has created new business opportunity for the local farmer. So the cattle graze very extensively in low numbers across around 1,000 hectares of land from this middle valley here right up to the valley head below Great Gable. So their impacts, because of the weight of them, they're breaking up the ground and the grass sward more, so they're allowing more natural regeneration to happen. And over the last 15 years we've seen a huge kind of boost in the floral diversity within this landscape. So a real kind of learning process for us as a team and for the farmer involved as well. So since the cattle arrived back in 2007, we've been doing some bird monitoring with our local ornithologist, and we've recorded some significant increases in terms of nature recovery. So 25% increase in bird species and a 65% increase in bird numbers specific to this Gillithwaite area, which is fantastic news.
The forests of Ennerdale are very diverse. They extend around 600, 700 hectares across the valley and range from ancient semi-natural woodland right through to native species such as pine, and then non-native species, typically Sitka spruce, but also western hemlock and cedar. Behind me is a conifer forest that's just been thinned, and you can start to see some of the diversity of structure with regeneration and gaps and glades that we're hoping the forest will develop into. One of the big challenges we have in Ennerdale with our big forest is Phytophthora, which is a disease of larch. And larch is a big component of the valley because it's like a broadleaf. It loses its needles in autumn and changes colour. Looks fantastic. But unfortunately this disease is attacking our larch trees, not just here but across England and in other parts of UK as well. And we're having to fell those trees to try and reduce the sporulation so the disease doesn't spread or jump into another species such as oak. And that means we're not in control of what happens in the valley. We just have to fell whatever gets infected. But there is an opportunity then for us to change the species, to plant native trees like Scots and birch, and hopefully in the future, our future successors will see a different woodland to what we see today. As part of our focus on natural processes, we're moving further and further towards relying on natural regeneration where the seed source is there. However, at the east end of the valley, the only seed source is Sitka spruce, which is very dominant in the valley. So we are having to plant native trees like birch, oak, juniper, willow, rowan. And the plan is really that they are the future seed source for the future woodland, not the woodland itself. They are the seed source for the future woodland. Ennerdale's forests bring it a character that's not typical of most Lake District valleys. In fact, many people will say it feels a bit like Canada or Scotland. These tall conifers and the mix of species in and around them, and the Rockies, crags and mountains just have a different feel about them, a wild, remote feel that adds to the sense of place and sense of wildness of this valley. As we head up to the top of the valley, heading east, you notice that the forest is dominated by Sitka spruce. There's not many other species. The seeds haven't blown from the west east far enough to regenerate this area yet. We're doing a number of things here. The main change we're making is removing non-native conifer from the valley bottom, from the riparian woodland zone, allowing that to regenerate, planting some species that don't regenerate, so we get better, more open native woodland which our cattle can roam through and which connects the valley from mountain right through to the lake at the west end. This will take a couple of decades, but already we can see the benefits in areas that were done in the late 1990s. We're here at Moss Dub Tarn, which is a lovely, tranquil place in the middle of the valley. Water body surrounded by woodland. And it's here that we hope to reintroduce beaver at some point in the future. We've had an ecology feasibility study done which says that beaver would be suitable, and we're now in a phase of just starting the public engagement and discussion. If we go forward, it'd be really great to see how beavers change the aquatic environment in the same way that cattle are having an impact on the terrestrial environment. We think they'll really bring in more wetland and store more water here, and the wetland will bring more insects and bird life, which will kickstart the bottom of the food chain. So it's a really exciting opportunity that we're looking forward to over the next couple of years. We haven't said much about the valley's mountains behind me, but they are absolutely an important part of Wild Ennerdale. They protect the landscape, they enclose it so you can't see out into busier places and into urban areas. They give it height and altitude which bring new habitats, and they create drama that gives us that sense of wildness that's important and they also provide a level of tranquility. We're doing things up on the mountains as well as down here in the valley, but it's more difficult to get there. But we are looking after some subalpine meadows, and we're trying to exclude sheep grazing from these areas by re-erecting an old wall, a stone wall along the ridgeline at about 3,000 feet above sea level. It's a challenging area because it's very big, it's very remote, it takes a long time to get to. We're looking at expanding the woodlands in Ennerdale. Currently they cover about 18% of the valley, but mostly in the valley bottom and some of the valley sides. We'd like to see them grow out and over parts of the valley's mountains. Different woodlands, scrub, montane woodland, open, clumpy, birch, rowan, juniper, willow. But nonetheless very important for birds, invertebrates and animals. Over the next 50 years or so we hope that we might see the woodland cover in the valley expand to around 40% of the valley, which would be a real achievement. Around the valley, we thought we'd share with you some of the challenges we faced and some of the ways we're trying to handle those challenges.
So when we started out kind of 20 years ago with Wild Ennerdale, we knew that people were absolutely crucial to the vision, and that's well embedded. So it's not kind of a purist ecological approach, it's very much about people too. And a key element of that is working with the local community. So we've got an immediate local community in Ennerdale Bridge, just not far from the upper valley where we are just now. And we've got a wider kind of coastal community as well. So that advocacy and community support has been really critical. It's critical to any project in land management when you're starting. Otherwise, you're kind of along a journey where it's not going to sustain itself over any length of time. So a lot of my job has been working with individuals and different groups within the local immediate community and the coastal communities in West Cumbria. And I think when you first start on a different journey for a valley, there's always going to be a little bit of caution and nervousness about something new. And it's not until you start implementing kind of practical work on the ground that people can see what it actually means in practice. So that kind of transition from conifer-dominated forest to something much more dynamic and diverse. It's not until you start doing that on the ground that people have more of an understanding of what that actually means. We have a wonderful volunteer team, so that again, that local advocacy is really important. So around 20 volunteers, all who live locally, come out regularly, and that can be a whole range of different work right across the valley. And it doesn't matter whose land they're working on, whether it's National Trust or Forestry England, they're Wild Ennerdale volunteers. So that advocacy is important as well, and much further afield. You know, we have supporters regionally, nationally, and more so internationally too now, which is fantastic. So you need that buy-in to a process and to sustain over a long period of time. So we're very much about thinking that kind of future natural concept rather than trying to turn the clock back to a past landscape.
Rewilding a whole valley takes multi-decades. We're already 20 years into Wild Ennerdale, and we would still say to people we are just beginning. And over that 20 years, we've had multiple government policies, multiple leaders of our organisations, and some of the partners on the ground have changed as well. So it's really important that we think about advocacy. Advocacy in our own organisations, in organisations that have authority over what we do, say planning, and also organisations at a higher level that can have that broad impact on whether rewilding is seen as a positive thing or a negative thing. So what we do probably every couple of years is we look again at a sort of advocacy chart, people that we know who are in places of power but don't know much about what we're doing. People that don't know much about what we're doing but are locally important to us. And we'll try and invite them to the valley and get them along and take time to introduce them to what we're doing and try and win their support through understanding, so that when we're there in meetings that we can't attend, where they're thinking about policies that we're not involved in, hopefully Wild Ennerdale will appear in those discussions and have an impact on the direction of travel of that particular policy, which will benefit us but benefit other people around the country, because we want to see this type of approach to nature conservation, to land management and natural process-led approach much more widely, and that we're not the only people doing it. And that's starting to happen, which is really exciting.
So I think one of the challenges we face as a partnership is about managing expectation. So when you're bringing in something new, sometimes, particularly in a British kind of land management where we're used to working to quite small timescales, you might have a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan, 10-year plan if you're lucky. But we're very much about thinking long term with Wild Ennerdale, and there's no fixed endpoint. So it's more an evolving process towards implementing things on the ground. However, sometimes when you present an idea, such as wanting to get pine marten back in the landscape, there could be an expectation that, okay, we need to do that tomorrow or next week. And often it takes much longer than that. The habitat needs to be right. There needs to be engagement support from the local community, and also it needs to be right for the species. So we learned from pine marten that although they're finding their way into the kind of northern area in England from Scotland, that actually if we kind of introduce them quite over a short period of time into Ennerdale, they would quite quickly disperse and disappear from out of this valley. So that wasn't the right timing for pine marten. Equally, we're looking at beaver, and again, we would love to just pop beaver into Ennerdale next week. The habitat's right, there's plenty of food source for them, that wide river corridor and the tributaries would be well suited to beaver. We know where they would like to go. However, again, there's a time kind of lead up to that, and crucially part of that is the community engagement, and so we're working on that over the next year, and that will form an important part of the licensing application. Another thing we've been careful to do, or not to do, is to be too driven by funding. So again, it's that managing expectations. If a pot of funding comes up, you need to have a clear purpose of why you're applying for that funding so that you don't become funding driven. So we're clear, for an example, with shifting away from spruce dominated treescape towards something much more diverse. If funding can come in to help deliver that, then that's fantastic, and we are starting to kind of explore more routes for that. But we won't be driven into a different way that diverts from the vision or the ethos of Wild Ennerdale just because there's a pot of funding there.
Another challenge in any long-term partnership like this is things we don't control, things we can't stop, things we have very little influence about. And one example here is a disease called Phytophthora, which impacts our larch trees. Now, larch trees are not native to England, but they are a very important part of many of our forests and landscapes across the country, especially here in the Lake District, where they change colour in autumn and they are lighter trees, they have vegetation growing under them than, say, our Sitka spruce. But unfortunately, this disease called Phytophthora that's been imported on horticultural products about 8-9 years ago, it came into this country on azaleas and rhododendrons and then jumped into larch. That's here, and it's been here once before. About 8-9 years ago we had it, and we had to really make some challenging decisions about how do we deal with this, because it was going to affect over 100 hectares of our forest. So we had to fell some trees. Some trees we killed standing and they bring in different habitat. Some trees we felled and it took away, was extracted and sold, which gave us the opportunity to change that forest, introduce some new trees. But again, it went away, but it's back again this year in 2021, and we're gonna lose some of the most special bits of larch forest we have. The welcome to Ennerdale this autumn is going to look quite different when we don't have the autumn colours. But what we try and do is look at these challenges and see if there are ways we can broaden a path that natural processes can operate on. Rather than taking one response to the challenge, can we do 3 or 4 responses that perhaps give different opportunities? We may not know what nature will do with these opportunities, these pathways, but if we offer nature multiple pathways, then hopefully natural processes have greater opportunity to be free to act. And that's one way we've really found in trying to deal with things we don't have any control over. What we do control is how we respond. One of our challenges has always been how we blur the boundaries between forests and farming, between growing trees and grazing animals. One of the ways we've done that is to reintroduce cattle to the valley, and we've opened up the whole valley floor and the forest to their grazing, which has been great, works really well. They create special niches for seedlings to grow into, they break up the turf, and they carry seedlings around, the seeds around the valley, up and down the hillside. But expanding native woodlands, which is our target, we want to see the valley go from 18% treed landscape to 40% treed landscape in maybe 50 years. That's not going to be easy when we've got sheep grazing as well, so we have reduced the intensity of sheep grazing, and we've changed where that happens. But sheep grazing and farming with sheep is a very cultural part of the Lake District, so we have to balance these objectives. But that's always a challenge. We have a fence boundary right round the valley to try and keep sheep from coming into the areas that we want to regenerate. But rocks fall off the mountain and the screes move, and so the fence sometimes doesn't do its job, and sheep get in and graze the trees we've just planted, which is a real shame. And that's just going to be an ongoing challenge for us, and we've just got to keep looking out for those areas where the fence isn't working properly, repair it, and then try and gather the sheep back up again. But the cows are doing a great job of blurring those boundaries, and actually through bringing cows into the valley, we've expanded the farm business by 25% compared to before we started rewilding the valley, which is a really good thing because it shows how farming, forests and rewilding can work together.
So we hope you've enjoyed this exploration of the Ennerdale Valley and found some of the information that we've shared with you useful, and also just got a sense of what a very special and beautiful place Ennerdale is in the Lake District, and perhaps even it's inspired you to maybe visit one day and experience Ennerdale for yourself.
Gareth and Rachel, thank you so much for preparing this this video. And there's some background noise.
I can hear you. That's fine. No, wait. It was a really good challenge for us, mate. We really enjoyed doing it.
Just a second. Oh, yeah. There was some disturbances. Yeah, I'm back. And also, I think it was great to hear about the challenges that you faced and that you communicated with us, because I think these challenges are shared by many rewilding initiatives. And it's also great that you emphasize that rewilding is a really a long-term process, and that after 20 years you just feel that that's your beginning, and it will take decades and decades more to get to the vision that you have. Let's take a quick look on the Q&A, and I would like to open now the Q&A session. I think there were questions during the presentation, and I see, Gareth, that you already answered some of them. So for the participants that were focused on the video, maybe we can scroll through the answered questions. I don't know if they're visible to you, but I think it's better that
I can always repeat the answers I gave if that's helpful.
Yeah, let's do that. So a question from Chris: we're exploring rewilding as a smaller reserve in partnership with a water company. They're concerned about any use of grazing animals, particularly cattle, because of the risk of the Phytophthora. I hope I pronounced it well. How do you manage this risk?
Yeah, it was a question that water company raised with us when we were looking at introducing cattle as well. More so at a senior level, the local water company company staff that work as partners with us were more than happy with the reintroduction of cattle, but to satisfy their national team and their sort of policies, we did a risk assessment, and that meant allowing the water company staff to actually walk onto partners' land, which normally they wouldn't be allowed to do. But because we're all in a partnership, they could actually walk around the lake and walk onto partners' land and see what was happening. What that risk assessment identified was that as we were already reduced the intensive sheep grazing by a significant number of sheep, that actually the relatively low number of cattle, 40, 50 cows extensively grazed, would actually produce less cryptosporidium than the number of sheep that were taken off. And then secondly, where we were putting the cows in the middle of the valley, where that area touched the lake, was still 4 kilometers from where the water intake was. And cryptosporidium has a lifespan in water and in daylight. Once it's in daylight, then it eventually denatures and dies off. And because the lake has a very long, I can't remember the name of the scientific name, but water cycling in the lake, the time taken from the water coming in by the river end to leaving it at the intake end where the water is collected for human consumption, that's quite a number of months, because the shape of the lake bottom affects the water circulation. And during that time, the cryptosporidium would have died out, it would have denatured. So we did this risk assessment, or the water company did this risk assessment with their staff. We contributed to it, and that was presented to the national team, and that helped us make the changes we wanted to grazing.
I think also, just to add one more thing, in the lake, the treatment plant also has cryptosporidium treatment as part of the process of providing drinking water to the coastal community. So that's an added, security measure, if you like, for that risk.
Thanks, Rachel and Gareth. And then there was a question about natural grazing, and if you're thinking about introducing other species such as horses, bison, maybe.
Go on, Rachel.
Well, we've got one of our team, one of our colleagues, Victoria, one of Gareth's colleagues, would absolutely love to see horses and bison, elk, you name it. She would love to see that in the valley. But I think importantly, our focus is to stick with cattle for now, because it was there were quite a few elements to getting cattle in the valley, bearing in mind what our starting point was of a grazing animal that was dominated, a grazing process that was dominated by sheep. So we wanted that dynamic disturbance factor from cattle. And they're doing really well, and they're doing that dynamic disturbance that we wanted. So we've got no plans for now to introduce another grazing animal, because we don't feel that we need to do that. I appreciate other animals can bring a different type of disturbance, but for now we're comfortable where we are with the cattle, and we're gradually expanding the areas that they've got access into in the valley.
Yeah, I think the other thing.
Sorry, Gareth.
I think the thing is, we don't really have any experienced farmers who are experienced with horses or other species, and that's the route we've taken with the catalyst, to actually engage with the farming community to actually help us. So we would have to bring somebody else in, and that might cause concern to the farming community. And I think also we've got a very young forest, and we're having to fell quite a bit of that because of Phytophthora, this larch disease, and fell some of it to allow us to change the diverse and structure. So our forest is at a stage where I don't think it's that resilient to lots of grazing animals. Maybe in 50 to 100 years time, when there's more mature seeding trees around and the right level of disturbance, it might be. But I think at the moment it would struggle if we put too many grazing animals into the mix. Much though, like Rachel and my colleague, I'd love to see some elk or something a bit bigger in the valley, something that's a bit more iconic. But it's a long process, this, and whilst 20 years is a long time, it's half our working lifespan. It's not that long in a rewilding context.
There's a question from Thomas Erde, and the question is, I assume there are also deer present in the park. Do you have any issues with deer populations, and how do you manage it?
Simple answer, yes, we have deer. We have resident roe deer, and we have some larger red deer that move up and down the county from a sort of base in South Cumbria. So they often come and sort of mooch around Ennerdale. Often young stags, the male stags, sort of go on a bit of a tour of the county, and they come into Ennerdale as well. So we do have deer. We don't have any issues really with management because we can shoot them. And we have our own wildlife ranger employed by Forestry England, whose responsibility is to maintain deer levels at a level where we get woodland regeneration and their habitat impact is minimal. So it's not a problem for us. We have a much bigger problem with sheep because we can't just shoot them. We have to try and gather them up, find our own who owns them, find out how they're getting in. So it's a lot more involved than with deer.
Well, connected to this human intervention, I'm happy to say that we have our head of Rewilding at Rewilding Europe, Raquel Filgueras, with us. And she has a question, and she had a comment. She says that it's great to see the long-term vision and hearing that 20 years is just the start. And now connected to your answer, Gareth, her question is, with the long-term thinking in mind, have you started efforts to bring back predators in, say, 10, 20 years from now? If yes, what would those be?
We haven't started any efforts to do that. As partners, we often talk about, wouldn't it be great if we had some predators? But in context, Ennerdale is a relatively small valley in Cumbria. It was probably large enough to hold 1.5 lynx or something like that. So, whatever we do in terms of predators has to be done with the context of our neighbours and the wider landscape. And any predator is going to want a bigger range than we can offer it. And whilst we all love to see predators, and I always recount an interview we did with a television company some years ago, where they were just in the valley interviewing us, and the interviewer wanted, the reporter wanted to speak to some mountain bikers, and I said, well, it's the middle of the week, probably nobody's going to mountain biking here. And lo and behold, 2 mountain bikers came down the valley, so they stopped them and started talking to them, and they were both Yellowstone Rangers from America. One was a British lady and one was an American, and they'd met at college and got married and were now working as rangers at Yellowstone. And she said to them, do you think Ennerdale's wild? And the American's response was, well, no, because there's nothing here that can eat me. So, I think there is a context to that, which is very important, but we have to bear in mind that if we were to try and introduce a predator, we'd have to do a level of consultation at a county or Cumbria scale, which is quite a large level of consultation for our small staffing of our partnership. So I think we have to let that lie for the moment and see how the culture of society responds to the reintroduction of things like beavers, which are quite challenging in themselves in an English context. I don't know if Rachel wants to add anything.
Well, just to say, I think again, patience plays an important role here, because we're seeing beaver wasn't mentioned up until in the media, and kind of we're starting to see beaver introduced at small scales around the UK, particularly in England, down south and Yorkshire and places, and I think that helps support our bigger ambitions for beaver, because we're looking to do it at a much bigger scale than what's happening in other sites around England. But the fact that it becomes more kind of a normal dialogue in the context of wildlife in the UK really helps Ennerdale in reintroducing something that, let's not forget, it was here once upon a time. It's not that long ago, 400 years ago, that it was here. But I think the more normal it becomes in the world of conservation in the UK, the more that helps steer kind of reintroductions in Ennerdale.
Well, good luck with the reintroduction of the beaver, and you know that in the ERN we have several projects that did the same work. So in case, it would be great that you connect if you have any problems or would like to comment it. Maybe we could even do a webinar about beaver reintroduction. I'm sure that would be quite interesting.
Yeah, that'd be great.
There is I think there's the last, how many questions do we have? Raquel says, thanks Gareth and Rachel for your feedback. I look forward to the next 20 years, and me as well. We have time for one last question, and this is, I was also curious about that. It comes from Liz, and her question is, how do you manage tourism in Ennerdale? And my question is, how do you develop nature-based tourism?
Go on, Rachel.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something we're starting to think about more. So we always refer to Ennerdale as a quiet valley in West Cumbria, and relatively speaking to the rest of the Lake District, it is quieter. However, the honeypot areas are becoming much busier in the Lake District over the years, and that naturally pushes people to explore the quieter parts in the Western Valley, so Ennerdale, Buttermere, Wasdale. So in high season now, I think generally these quieter lakes are becoming much busier with tourists. So in Ennerdale, we have 2 main car parks at the western end of the valley. So that's, if you're arriving by car, that's where you would come into the western area. And then I think in terms of Ennerdale being a quieter, wilder valley, one of its benefits, I guess, is that there's no public access by vehicle up the middle and upper eastern end of the valley. So that keeps it quiet. The only restricted access is as far up as a field centre and 2 youth hostels. So that provides fantastic accommodation for people, whether you're local or you're a visitor, to stay right in the heart of the valley in a quiet place. And you will have either had to kind of walk in or cycle in. So the tourism at the western end is primarily in Ennerdale Bridge. There's a couple of hotels and a small hotel, bed and breakfast, a pub, but it's very small scale, no big hotels or lots of infrastructure or anything like that. So we are thinking more, and we're not looking to expand that particularly, but it's more thinking about how we can develop more of a link between connection and tourism and nature, so that ecotourism side. And we are looking to, especially thinking about beaver and any other species in the future, how we can link that with the accommodation that's already there, and perhaps utilise existing buildings in the valley, whether they're owned by National Trust or Forestry. So building a bit more of something unique to Ennerdale that links, that embedded in there is that kind of nature recovery and close connection with nature as part of that package for visitors, whether you're a local visitor or a tourist from further afield. So we're just starting to explore opportunities there.
Thanks, Rachel. I have a question from Georgia Baker. Would it be okay that I share your email with the audience? She would like to ask you some questions at a later date. And I think, Gareth, that you also included your email here in the Q&A. I'm going to put it in the chat box. I think it's there. I would now like to end this webinar and to thank Rachel and Gareth for taking us to the Wild Ennerdale. It was really fantastic to see how gorgeous this place is, and for preparing this fantastic video and answering our questions. Thank you so much for your time. And to the attendees for your interest and for joining us. As I said, this webinar is recorded, and in case you want to watch it again or share it with your colleagues, it will be available on Rewilding Europe's YouTube account early next week. Thank you, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks for joining. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. Keep rewilding, whatever you're doing. Thank you, May.
Thank you. Bye-bye.